Dear students, subscribers, and the viewers, welcome to the IAS Mentor. We are in lecture number 46 in the series Indian Polity, and we have covered a lot of topics till this point of time. We have covered till the directive principles of state policy. Starting from the basics, we have covered certain grounds, and we have reached till the directive principles of state policy. So today in this particular lecture, we'll see the fundamental duties. And from the point of view of the examination, not many questions have been asked. In fact, in the last 10 years, not even a single question has been asked in the mains examination. But probably in the prelims examination, they can ask you one question from the fundamental duties. So that to that extent, we'll try to understand as to what is this fundamental duty. And in fact, if you see this fundamental duty, the fundamental duty is not part of the original constitution. The fundamental duty was inserted into the constitution only by way of a 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act. So what we will do is, as we'll start with the fundamental duties, first we'll try to understand the historical background under which the fundamental duties was inserted. Which committee recommended for inserting the fundamental duties into the constitution? What are the various fundamental duties? We'll try to see that with examples. What is the nature of these fundamental duties? Is there any criticism to the fundamental duties? So we'll try to understand all those things. And also probably from which area the question can come. That is also one thing that we'll try to understand as we'll discuss the fundamental duties. All right. So with that, we'll go to the lecture directly with regard to the fundamental duties. So presently, where is this fundamental duties in the constitution? It is there in part 4A of the constitution. In fact, as I already said, it was not there in the original constitution, but it was inserted into the constitution by the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act in 1976. In 1976, the constitution was amended. And at that point of time, Prime Minister was the Indira Gandhi. So under the leadership of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, the constitution was amended and a new part was inserted. That is part 4A of the constitution, and a new article was also inserted. That is article 51A into the constitution. And they inserted basically 10 duties. That is 10 fundamental duties into the constitution. But today, presently, if you see the fundamental duties, there are 11 duties. So the last duty that was to be added to the part 4A of the constitution is by the 86th Constitutional Amendment Act, which has also amended not only the fundamental duties but also the fundamental rights and also the directive principles of state policy. So it is this 86th Constitutional Amendment Act that has happened in the year 2002 that has made all these changes. The 11th duty was inserted by the 86th Constitutional Amendment Act. Now, what is the background under which the fundamental duty was inserted? If you see the background under which the fundamental duty was inserted, you can see the year 1976. Now, prior to this 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act, in 1975, there was a national emergency. In fact, the third national emergency was proclaimed by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. Means on the recommendation of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, the President has proclaimed the third national emergency. 1975, and after the emergency and prior to the emergency, there was a lot of protest in our country. In fact, for someone who wanted to know the background under which the emergency was proclaimed, in fact, that was a time when the election of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was challenged in the Allahabad High Court. The Allahabad High Court told that the election of Prime Minister Indira Gandhi was invalid because the Allahabad High Court was convinced that the Prime Minister Indira Gandhi during her election has involved in what is called as corrupt practice. And involving in corrupt practice during election is a electoral offence as per the Representation of People Act, and therefore her election was considered to be invalid. And then after that, an immediate appeal was made in the Supreme Court, and the appeal was to be heard by the Supreme Court. But in the meantime, there was a lot of protest against Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. And her political opponents, they took advantage of this particular situation and they protested against her. They called on moral basis she has to step down as a prime minister. So you can say there was some kind of internal protest that was happening in the country. And that is a time when Prime Minister Indira Gandhi advised her to recommend the president to proclaim what is called as national emergency. Now, why I am discussing all those things is that there's a background under which this fundamental duty was brought in. So then, based on which Prime Minister Indira Gandhi advised the president, and the president under Article 352 has proclaimed national emergency on the grounds of what is called as internal disturbance. Now, after the emergency was proclaimed, there was a lot of again disturbance because people were arrested, they were put behind bars, the fundamental rights were suspended. So there were certain element of protest that was happening here and there. And that is when the government thought that in the Constituent Assembly there was too much emphasis upon the rights. While the rights has been given a lot of emphasis, but what about the duties that the citizens owe towards the state? On the one hand, the Constitution is protecting the rights of the citizens against the state. That is all fine. But at the same time, as citizens, they should also owe certain duty towards the state. So, for example, respecting the national anthem, national flag, or not damaging the public property, protecting the environment. So, these are all some of the duties probably the citizens should owe towards the state. But however, there is no such provision in the Constitution. So, under this particular backdrop, a committee was appointed by Prime Minister Indira Gandhi, and that committee came to be what is called as a Swaran Singh committee. So I'll discuss more about this national emergency when I take up the emergency provisions in the Constitution. Don't worry about it. So this is just, I want to give a background under which this has happened. So the Swaran Singh committee was appointed, who was a cabinet minister in the Indira Gandhi government at that point of time. So the Swaran Singh committee has recommended for introduction of what is called as fundamental duties, on the lines similar to that of what is called as the Constitution of USSR. At that point of time, USSR. So similar to that of the Constitution of USSR, there should be some fundamental duties in the Constitution. That is the recommendation that is given by the Swaran Singh committee. So this recommendation was accepted by the Government of India, and accordingly the Parliament has amended the Constitution by the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act 1976, and they brought in a fundamental duty. So the idea is, as the Constitution guarantees right to the citizen, the Constitution should also impose some duties upon the citizens towards the state. So it is not only that the citizens can exercise and enjoy the rights, they also owe certain duties. So the rights should also be correlated with what is called as the duties, or in other words, as the Constitution gives the right, the citizen shall also perform certain duties. So this should be in the minds of the citizen. So for that particular reason, the fundamental duties was brought in. But the most important thing that you have to keep in your mind is, although the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act 1976 has brought in the duties, there is no doubt in that, but the way the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act has placed its duties into the Constitution was that it is not justiciable in nature. So this is very, very important. It is not justiciable in nature. That means, while the fundamental rights are justiciable in nature, that means if the rights are violated, the affected individuals can go to the court and get it enforced in a court of law. But what if the citizens are not performing the duties? If the citizens are not performing the duties, then the state cannot do anything about it. It is only a moral obligation upon the citizens to perform these duties. That's the first thing that you have to understand. So while the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act has brought in the fundamental duties, but these fundamental duties are merely a moral obligation. So the second thing that you have to understand is, in case of between fundamental rights and the fundamental duties, while fundamental rights are enforceable in a court of law, whereas fundamental duties are not enforceable. While fundamental duties are against the state, or fundamental rights are against the state, fundamental duties are for the citizens to perform towards the state. Now, while the fundamental rights are for both citizens as well as the aliens, because not every fundamental right is only to the citizens. Only certain fundamental rights are restricted only to the citizens, but other rights are available to the aliens as well. But whereas fundamental duties, when you talk about it, it is explicitly only to the citizens. The aliens does not owe any duty towards the state. So these are all some fundamental things that you'll have to keep in your mind. That's very, very important. In fact, if you look into the entire fundamental duties, it is also summarized that the fundamental duties are nothing but they are codification of tasks integral to the Indian way of life. That means what the commentators say about the nature of fundamental duties, which we are subsequently going to see, which is there in Article 51A, that though the fundamental duties were brought into the Constitution by the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act in 1976, if you look into the nature of these fundamental duties, these are not nothing new. This is anyways the way of life that the Indians were leading. What was part of our culture, what was our way of life, is now explicitly put in the Constitution by a way of the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act 1976, but it is nothing more than that. That is exactly, you'll have to understand when I say fundamental duties are nothing but codification of tasks integral to the Indian way of life. Now, most of you will agree with this particular statement. If you have to summarize and describe fundamental duties as nothing but codification of tasks integral to the Indian way of life. Now, why? Because later we'll see the fundamental duties and you'll understand a lot of things is already practiced and a lot of things is already part and parcel of our life, part and parcel of our culture. It's only that it has been explicitly put by the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act in 1976. So this is the basic understanding you should have, the background under which it was brought in, why it was made non-justiciable in nature. So now let us move and let us try to understand some of the duties that is mentioned in Part 4A or in Article 51A of the Constitution. Alright. So what are the duties that is mentioned in Article 51A of the Constitution? So these are the duties that is mentioned in Article 51A of the Constitution. So there are 11 duties presently. The last one was added by the 86th Constitutional Amendment Act. So what are those duties? So first, if you see, to abide by the Constitution and to respect its ideals and institutions, the national flag and national anthem. That means as a citizen, we should abide by the ideals that has led to the we should abide by the Constitution and respect the various ideals and institutions in the Constitution. Say for example, the ideals like justice, liberty, equality. So these are all ideals very much enshrined in our Constitution. So as a citizen, our conduct should respect all those things. Not only that, we should also respect the various institutions under the Constitution. When you talk of institutions under the Constitution, the institutions like Parliament, the institution like Judiciary, so all these things has to be respected as a citizen of India. And apart from that, we shall also respect the national flag, national anthem. So all these things should be respected. That is one of our fundamental duty as per the Constitution. Next, to cherish and to follow the noble ideals which inspired our national struggle for freedom. So what are the various noble ideals that inspired our struggle for freedom? Say for example, the ideals like self-respect. There was self-respect movement during the freedom struggle. Non-violence, satyagraha, ahimsa. So these are all some of the values that was motivating people to go for what is called as freedom struggle, and then subsequently they led to independence of India. So all these things has to be respected as a citizen. To uphold and to protect the sovereignty, unity and integrity of India. So what does it mean? To uphold the sovereignty, unity and integrity of India, which means basically as a citizen, it is our responsibility that we should not be in favor of any secessionist tendencies. And if somebody is taking part in any of the secessionist tendencies, we should not only be part of it, we should work against it. And we should support the state in any way where it calls for what is called as the unity and integrity of our country. So that's again very important. Now the next duty is to promote harmony and the spirit of common brotherhood among all the citizens. So it is also our responsibility to promote the feeling of what is called as fraternity. In fact, that is also reflected in the preamble to the Constitution of India. So fraternity is something that we'll have to display, transcending all the differences. We know that India is a land of diversity, and we also believe in the concept of what is called as unity in diversity. So it is our responsibility to transcend beyond all these differences, but still promote the feeling of what is called as brotherhood among the fellow citizen. That is basically our duty. And apart from that, it is also our duty to do with all the practices that is derogatory to the dignity of women. Say for example, practices like sati has been done away with. We also understand now practices like dowry, which goes against the dignity of women. So all these things should be done away with. So probably as a part of our fundamental duty. But having said all those things, whatever I discussed till this point of time, this is only a moral obligation. The state cannot punish us for not performing any of these duties. Okay, so these are all only what is called as moral obligation. Now come to the next thing. To protect and improve the natural environment, including forests, lakes, rivers, and wildlife, and to have compassion for the living creatures. Now, see, in fact, I have asked one particular question, or rather, there was one statement before I started these things, that the fundamental duties are nothing but codification of task integral to the Indian way of life. Which means I gave an explanation that fundamental duties is nothing but it is already part and parcel of our life. What was part and parcel of our life was explicitly codified in the constitution. So you can easily connect with this particular thing. To protect the national and natural environment, to protect the lakes, rivers, and of course other living creatures, that is anyways part and parcel of our culture. So today also there are a lot of people who worship nature. There are a lot of tribal community which are so fond of nature and they worship nature. And in fact, they may not even have specific gods, but they believe in the nature only. So this is followed in number of traditional cultures in India, and that was part and parcel of the life of the people. What was part and parcel of the life of the people is only what is explicitly mentioned in the constitution by the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act. Similarly, respecting the national anthem, national flag, that is anyways part and parcel of our culture. But later it was explicitly mentioned in the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act 1976 as a fundamental duty. Come to the next thing. To develop scientific temper, humanism, and the spirit of inquiry and reform. In fact, there is no dearth of reformers and people with scientific temper in our country. We had great reformers like Raja Ram Mohan Rai, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar, and then apart from that, we have a lot of people right from the ancient time who had done a lot of things with regard to science in India. So, for example, we had great achievements in space, medicine, zero was invented in our country. So, these are all some of the examples that we can give as to how Indians had scientific temper. That's anyways part and parcel of our culture, but it is now explicitly put in the part 4A of the constitution. To strive towards excellence in all spheres of individual as well as collective activity. So not only individually we shall excel, individually we shall achieve a lot of things, but collectively also as a society we'll have to grow. Say for example, the ideas like probably the cooperatives, the ideas like association. So collectively also as a society that we should grow, that is what it is mentioned as a part of it. So collectively and mutually we should support each other as a fellow citizens. Okay, so that is what is given here. To defend the country and render the national service when called upon to do so. And especially this is our duty when there is a requirement, when there's a natural calamity, when there's a war, or when there's any of the other activities where the service of the citizen is required. So we do have to take part. That is our duty. Today, a lot of people volunteer in what is called as territorial army. A lot of people is also part of National Cadet Corps. These are all examples of how we can perform this particular duty. To value and to preserve the rich heritage and our composite culture. So there are a lot of traditions and values which we should keep preserving. Say for example, the culture of joint family, or probably how we mingle with various other communities during festivals. So these are all examples of how we have been maintaining our composite culture, and probably we should carry forward our culture of respecting the elders. So probably, so these are all some of the things of our composite culture which should be preserved and which is also a fundamental duty. To safeguard public property and to abjure from violence. So it is also our foremost property to abjure from violence and not to damage the public property. Okay. So that is, again, we have been taught of this right from the schools, and we have been inculcated this particular quality, which is also put as a part of what is called as the fundamental duty. Provide opportunities for the education of his children or ward. between the age of 6 and 14 years, this duty was added by the 86 Constitutional Amendment Act. In fact, this was the latest duty to be added by the 86 Constitutional Amendment Act in 2002. So these are the duties that we are supposed to follow. But however, please keep this in your mind that the duties are only moral obligations and they are not legal obligations. That means if the citizens are not performing these duties, they are not liable to be prosecuted in a court of law just because it is mentioned in part 4 of the Constitution, or in other words, they are not justiciable in nature. So this is basically what you'll have to understand. But before we complete this particular lecture, one thing that you'll have to keep in your mind, okay, all right, the fundamental duties are not justiciable in nature or not enforceable in a court of law. As it is mentioned in the part 4 of the Constitution, they are not enforceable in a court of law. But the question is it possible for the state to make a law, and by that law can they enforce any of the fundamental duties? Can they make a law and thereby they can put a legal obligation upon us to perform any of these duties? That is very much possible. Say for example, there's a law which is called as Prevention of Insults to National Honors Act. So this law has already been enacted by the Parliament, Prevention of Insults to National Honors Act, and as per this particular act, anybody who is disrespecting the national anthem, national flag, the Constitution of India, map of India can be punished. A punishment is prescribed. So by this law, people can be punished, not just because it is mentioned in the part 4 of the Constitution. While the Constitution does not make or does not provide for a legal obligation to perform the fundamental duties, nor it prescribe any mechanism as to how it can be implemented. All those things are not there. But however, the Parliament is free to enact a law and thereby it can impose certain legal obligation which may be similar to that of, or which may be in the nature of what is called as the fundamental duties. So that is something that has to be very, very clear in your mind. All right. So this is one area where UPSC can probably ask you the question. But again, the fundamental duties are also not beyond any criticism. There are some element of criticism to the fundamental duties as well. So some of the criticism of fundamental duties, they're not exhaustive in nature. When I say they're not exhaustive in nature, there are a lot of other duties was also recommended by the Swaran Singh committee, but not all these things has been added. So only very few things has been added. Why not the other things? So that is one criticism. They are vague and complex. It's not very clear. If you see, there is a lot of overlap between these fundamental duties itself. And it is not very precise in terms of how it has been framed. So this is again one of the criticism. They are code for moral precepts. That means they are only moral obligation. There is no legal obligation. So people may not follow all those things. It is superfluous in nature. That is again another criticism. So these are all criticisms with regard to the fundamental duties. But what are the significance? So the fundamental duties does have its significance. They are a moral reminder to the citizens. That means there is something that you should understand, that the idea is something become part of your value system and that can guide your behavior, and over a period of time that can become a habit. So the idea is that to impart these values into the citizens, and the moment these values are imparted into the citizens, and automatically the citizens will start following these things over a period of time. So first to bring in what is called as the moral values. It's against warring against anti-national and anti-social activities. So the way the fundamental duties are framed is in a way that it is warring against the anti-national and the anti-social activities. That means it goes against someone who is, it goes against people who are performing anti-national and anti-social activities. So therefore it is in the interest of the state. It's a source of inspiration to the citizen. So all these duties are in a way that it can inspire the behavior, good behavior of the citizens, and if required, it can be enforceable by a way of a law. Not just directly because they're in the part 4, it can be enforced, but a law can be made, and therefore by that law, these duties can be enforced. But however, there is no specific procedure that is laid down in the Constitution as to how these laws can be made. It is just done like an ordinary legislation. As any other ordinary law is made by the Parliament, in that way it can be made and it can be enforced. So these are all the basic understanding you should have with regard to the fundamental duties. So if at all any questions can be asked, I don't think any question can come in the mains examination, but if at all they can ask you this particular question. Fundamental duties are nothing but codification of task integral to the Indian way of life. So if you want, you can write an answer for this particular question. Fundamental duties are nothing but codification of task integral to the Indian way of life. You can write an answer, and if you want, you can put it in the comment box. If I have the time, I'll go through it and I'll give you the review. So how do you approach this particular question? Fundamental duties are nothing but codification of task integral to the Indian way of life. So how do you decode this particular question? So first you can give some introduction as to what do you understand by fundamental duties. And then in the body part, you'll have to write all those things. That is, fundamental duties is nothing but codification of task integral to the Indian way of life. Where you'll have to explain that yes, the fundamental duties are not something new. We already had it as a part of our culture, but now it has been explicitly placed in the Constitution by the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act 1976. For that, you can give 3-4 examples to explain. Already it was there, but it is placed after the 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act 1976, and you can give an appropriate concluding remarks. So let me see if you are able to write an answer, and probably if you want, you can put it in the comment box. All right. So with that, we are almost coming to the end of this particular lecture. So have a look into this particular question. Consider the following. Statement 1. Fundamental duties are justiciable in a court of law. Is it justiciable in a court of law? Statement 2. Fundamental duties are applicable for both citizens and aliens. Which of the statements given above are correct? A only, A 1 only, B 2 only, C both 1 and 2, D neither 1 nor 2. So this is basically the question, and you can find the right answer, and you can put the answers in the comment box. So with that, we are almost coming to the end of the fundamental duties. So basically what you should understand with regard to the fundamental duties, non-justiciable in nature, and how many duties are there? 10 duties. Which amendment? 42nd Constitutional Amendment Act 1976 on the recommendation of the Swaran Singh Committee. When was the 11th duty inserted? So these are all the things probably it can be asked in the examination. So if you have any questions related to this particular lecture or any of the other topic, you can reach out to me through my Instagram account or through my Telegram channel. And if you have any friends or family members preparing for this examination, you can refer this particular channel and this particular series to them, and I'm quite sure it will be immensely beneficial to them. Thank you very much for watching this particular lecture. All the best.